Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hey, Are You Still There podcast. It's new music because it's a new day. This is a special pop-up edition of our Hey, Are You Still There podcast. If you listened to the last episode, you know that Beth is currently in Germany. And so with Beth being in Germany, I thought it would be no better time than now to bring in a guest co-host. I'd like to introduce you, Mr. Tim.
So what I think is so funny is, for how many years now have you been told that you look like Joe Rogan?
100. I even was told I looked like Joe Rogan back when we both had hair.
So I think it's very fitting that now you have your own podcast also. And maybe one day we'll compete with his.
And there will be an episode where I do talk about conspiracies, because I've got a lot of them.
Well, and that's one thing you two have in common. You both have big tinfoil hats on.
Absolutely. So if you listen to the last episode, you know that Beth is in Germany, but she's not alone. She is with her friend Wendy, and we explained how they got there. And so Tim is Wendy's other half.
Or someone would even say husband. I mean,
husband, partner.
Partner in crime, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, but not better. Not better.
No, definitely not better.
Guys can't ever be the better.
For sure.
Half.
Yeah, you can't say that.
So I called Tim this morning to check, to make sure we were still good for recording today. And I said, hey, Tim, what time you want to be here in the studios to record? And he said, well, I need to finish my dungeon. And then I'm going to Lowe's Hardware, and then I'm going to grab some lunch, and then I'll be there. I didn't really. What dungeon are you built? I mean,
I promise it's not as weird as you think. It's
Wendy is over in Germany right now. I know they're going to visit a concentration camp. Is she going over there to get ideas? I mean, what is this dungeon you're building?
I wasn't building a dungeon. I was trying to finish a dungeon in the new Legend of Zelda game. I've had that game for 2 months. I still haven't finished it yet. So I'm like, you know what? While Wendy's gone, I'm going to get some work done around the house. I'm going to finish my game.
Legend of Zelda.
Legend of Zelda.
Grown men playing video games.
Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, who you think you are? You think you're James Mitchell?
You got your board games. I would be so lucky to be James Mitchell.
Yes.
No, you got your board games. I've got my video games. I'm just a little more high tech than you are.
And you are a techie guy.
I am a techie guy.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on. I say we, like Beth had any choice in it. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on today. Not only because you are the other half of the spouse super duo that's with Beth over in Germany, but as you know, the four pillars, or we call them the intersection of life, that we focus on every week on this podcast is marriage, family, careers, and ministry. And so I thought today would be fun pop up because you have two of those that, I mean, they crisscross constantly, and that is career and ministry. And so first, you're a small business owner. Plug your small business. What do you do?
So in this coming February, it'll be 13 years since I started Solve. So Solve is an IT company. We're a managed services provider for small businesses who need outsourced help, like IT help desk, cybersecurity, consulting. We do cloud-based VoIP systems, all that fun stuff.
That sounds big time.
Yeah, sure. Whatever you want to say. All
right. So you started this business locally. Triad Tech Guys.
Yeah, started off as Triad Tech Guys when I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah. And
so I took Dwayne Long out to a coffee and said, so Dwayne, explain a P&L to me. I hear those things are important.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I had no idea what I was doing.
Oh, and so you expanded from the Triad, and now you're global. I know you have customers in, we're located in North Carolina. I know you got customers in Virginia, Maryland, all the way over to the West Coast in Seattle, Washington, correct?
Yeah, so I won't say global, but at least coast to coast, yes.
Coast to coast. You're covering the country.
I am.
All right.
Yeah.
So being a small business owner, put on that hat for me for a minute. What are the modern day struggles of being a small business owner in 2024?
Well, I mean, I think two of the ones that come to mind are obviously on the cusp of COVID. You've got inflation, so everything costs more, and so those costs don't just show up in grocery stores, but they also show up in salaries. That also shows up in cost of goods sold, buying equipment, the licenses you need to run things, and so that's the problem that small business owners run into, where they try to keep their prices affordable but when their prices are going up too, so they have to raise prices. So, trying to find that happy medium. Okay, how do I still stay fair to my clients, but also be able to pay my employees and also be able to pay myself and have margin and stuff like that. So I think that's been something I've had to juggle with for the past couple of years, how to navigate those things. And also just managing people. I think, you need people to run in your business. And I think I've had to learn almost how to separate because, maybe it's a spoiler, but, I'm a pastor, but I'm also a business owner. And I think a lot of times I try to be a pastor in my business. And actually, as the years have gone on, I've actually had to learn to separate out and not be a pastor in my business as much, and learn how to separate things out. Like, we want to be generous with our employees, but we also, we can't confuse generosity with compensation. Those are two different things, and learning how to, regulate that. Okay, compensation is earned and it should be a fair market value, and you can't go crazy with that. And then if we want to be generous, if an employee has a baby or has a birthday, we can be generous there or be generous with our praise, but not confusing the two. So just really learning how to separate out and be a good and Christ-like employer, but I'm not a pastor.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And you're not a Christian business. You're a business that just happens to be run by a Christian.
Absolutely.
And a pastor.
Yeah.
I think that's two totally different things. The reason, one of the things that kind of sparked the interest of having you on here, and I think this parallels a lot with church, is, and we'll get into the church side of it here in just a minute with congregation members, but you had one of your employees, a key employee, resign rather unexpectedly, and it's kind of left you in a bind.
Yeah.
How hard is it? You always hear about, nowadays especially, having to pay people astronomical amounts to get them to work, not being able to find good employees. This has put you in a bind. So what is it like trying to hire somebody in 2024?
Yeah, so all those things are true. Now the good thing, at least in my industry, is if this was 2 or 3 years ago, that people had all sorts of options in the tech industry, and you had to pay them exorbitant things. There's been a lot of layoffs lately, so that isn't as much the case. I have lots of candidates, but to your point, most of those candidates are not good candidates. So literally, you may laugh about this. One of the first steps in my hiring process is I say, okay, I want you to call me on this day at this time. And you'd be astounded at how many people that weeds out just by identifying either they don't know how to follow instructions and they're not prompt.
Yeah.
If they call me 7 minutes late, sorry, that's not going to work.
Good for you.
And so just something as simple as that weeds out people who are not prompt and can't read and follow instructions.
Yeah.
And so, but then a lot of other people get through. And so this is actually a first, so I had a good conversation with a girl. She sounded great over the phone. We had a great conversation. So I said, hey, send me a few references. So she does. And so I call all her references, leave voicemails. And the first one to call me back, her name is Lisa. And so she answers and she says, hi, this is Lisa. And then she says her last name, but her last name is the same last name as the candidate. And so I was like, So we go on with the conversation. And of course, she's singing her praises, that she's a great coworker, yada, yada. And so finally at the end of the conversation, I was like, so hey, Lisa, so how are you related to the applicant? Oh, we're not related. We're just real good friends. Like, okay, whatever. So I hang up.
Because you told me this story, and it's not like Smith.
No.
You know what I'm saying? This is not a common last name.
It's a unique name. I'm not going to say it, but it's a unique name.
The odds of two people that aren't related finding themselves with the same last name is about 1 in a billion.
Right. So then later on that night, this is a Friday night, I had a buddy over and a call comes in. I let it go to voicemail. And it's one of her second references. And it was one of her supervisors from a previous job. His name was Charles. And so in the voicemail, he goes, hey, this is Charles. And again, singing her praises, everything you'd want to hear. But the caller ID didn't match his name. It was someone with the same last name as the applicant again. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so I didn't even call him back. On Monday, I just called her up. I was like, hey, are you related to your references? No. So then I started going into the same story I just told you, and she just hangs up on me.
Busted!
I know. I was like, okay. So yeah.
So when does she start?
I was like, you know what? I was like, she can't even lie well. Why would we even hire her? if she could pull it off, she might even be worth hiring. But she didn't even lie well.
Did you tell her? And you want to be my latex salesman? Like Jerry to George when he was lying about the job.
Vandalay! It's Vandalay Industries.
Yes. Golly. So, being a Christian business owner, you have a certain set of values and moral beliefs that line up with your Christian beliefs.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of someone. And we're not perfect. You know what I mean? No. And I'm not saying this lady's not a Christian at all. She wanted a job. She was doing what she could. She got busted, right? Yeah. But obviously you're going to have employees that aren't, their ideas and morals and their faith is not going to line up with yours. I'm sure you work with customers who don't and other businesses that don't. How do you operate in the marketplace? You know, I mean, I'm just saying, for me, I would be so like, this sounds terrible, judgmental. Like in the fact that, you know, it's like that person, I'd be like, oh, that's typical, you know, blah, blah, blah. They need Jesus, you know, or, you know, I would, if there was someone, a company or a person that, I don't know, it just lived a lifestyle that was so opposite of mine and just, whatever, I would personally be like, I don't really want to do business with them. But you can't do that because you're in the, number one, you got to put food on the plate, right? And so you can't, as they say, beggars can't be choosers. So how do you, I don't know, like come to grips with, sometimes I got to work with and for maybe some unsavory characters.
Yeah. I mean, and that's obviously something I've had to wrestle with and has caused me to really mature, you know, over the last 13 years or so. Because, I've said some of the exact same things. I've been like, I don't want to work with them. But then I've also kind of come to the point of like, you know what? Their money's green too. I'll take it, sure. Now, obviously, there's a line. You know, if they're wanting me to do something that's unethical, I have an employee who he's overseas, great guy, love him to death. But he was having some money problems. And so he said, hey, what if I became a contractor instead of an employee? But the thing is, though, a lot of these countries, you know, they'll audit you. You know, so they have guidelines for, okay, you may be a contractor, but if you meet these criteria, you are an employee and you will get audited and you'll owe back income tax and all these things. And it's also it's lying. And so he's like, hey, what if you just make me a contractor? And then that will kind of help save me some money. It'll also save you money, which it would save me money. He's a believer, and so I could tell him. I said, well, man, like we're both believers, man. Like we have to live above reproach. You know, our word means something, and so we could do that, but that'd be deceitful. Like I could make you a contractor, but you're not a contractor. You're actually an employee. And so I do have those conversations where I do have to draw the line. I do have to dig my heels in. But then there's sometimes I work with clients and people, and I know what they do in their spare time. I know how they run their business. And it's not how I run my business, but as long as they're not trying to, you know, cheat me or anything like that, yeah, we have boundaries and we work well together.
Okay. And as you mentioned a moment ago, you are also a pastor. I know, man, going way back in the day, we'll go back 100 years, 200, whatever, founding of this country. I think a lot of pastors were bivocational, you know, and then it kind of became the norm that pastoral ministry was the vocation. I've run into people even now and, you know, like, hey, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, I'm a pastor. And they're like, okay, what else do you do? I'm like, that's it. And they're like, you can get paid for doing that? Like, you know, like they don't realize it. And I'm like, well, the good ones do. I don't much. But now I think the pendulum has swung. You know, churches are dying. COVID killed a lot of churches, closed a lot of doors. We got denominations that are whittling up and dying, and people in ministry now are becoming bivocational again. Most people go into ministry, they start pastoring, they realize they can't make a living, then they go get a second job, and they kind of do both. You went kind of the opposite route. You had your job, you have your company, you were at your church, you were youth pastor for a while, then associate pastor, and now lead pastor. So you're doing that, and you're still doing your business. How do you do both? Like that seems like a lot. Like somebody who has done ministry full time now for 28 and a half years. I know how, because to me, there's no part-time pastors.
Yeah.
Like your mind is always on the church. Your mind is always on your congregation, or at least it should be if you're a good pastor. And so it takes the same amount of time, whether you have another job or not. So how do you juggle ministry and owning a business?
Caffeine. Lots and lots of caffeine. I mean, I think, because people always think about, you go in, you're your own boss and you're going to be rich, which, I mean, there is a point to that, because, the only limit is you, like the sky's the limit. No one's determining your salary, but you are. But obviously you have to, your bank account, you have to make enough money. But I think when you have the goal of doing something like this as bivocational, obviously you want to have your bills paid, you want to have you want to meet your ends, but honestly the priority is time. And so for me, I've set up my business in a way where if I want, I could make more money than I make now, but instead I spend that on people. People to free up my time, which is why when this guy left so suddenly, that made it so hard, because now I have less time because I'm having to do his job. Yeah. But we also...
But you're not having to pay him, so you get more money.
I got more money, so it's Christmas, I got more money, it's great, but I have less time. So
right.
it's a trade-off. But I also just invested, some money in, I got like a virtual assistant, and she's great. She's been a virtual assistant before.
Is she real?
She's a real person.
Okay, so not like AI virtual assistant.
No, but she is in Pakistan.
Of course.
And so I pay her like $9 an hour.
Okay.
And actually it's been great because she's been leading the charge in these job postings and scheduling things. And so I can't imagine, and she was in so many ways a godsend, because I can't imagine being a pastor, being short-staffed, and having to take on this guy's responsibilities and be doing a job search. She has taken a lot of that off my plate. So I'm actually really excited about what my life is going to look like once I get his position filled again, and I have her and this new employee. Like, oh man, I'm going to have so much more freedom again. And so, yeah, I think so much of your priority has to be, again, obviously making sure your needs are met and your bills are paid, but really the priority is just time. Yeah. And building both your teams, your business team and your church team, so that you have the freedom and flexibility to do both. John Eldridge, he talks about when you're scheduling yourself, build margin into your schedule for the emergencies. Like plan for the emergencies. And when you can control your schedule, when you can control your time, you can do that, because when you're a pastor and a business owner, there's probably going to be an emergency in one of those places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, that's why, it's really important. Just that's what I do. I just really prioritize time over anything else.
And that's important to talk about, is margin. I think that's probably one of the reasons so many pastors burn out.
Yeah.
Is they don't give themselves enough margin. They don't know how to say no to their church. They don't know how to say no to their congregation members. So they're stretched so thin. They have no margin. They start to burn out. They take it out on their families. And then he or she, the pastor, ends up ultimately, more times than not, falling to a vice, that's an escape for them. And I think you're right. I think the only way that you can be, and you're successful in both. I mean, I've seen you, your company is great. You're an amazing pastor. You're doing both very well. And I think the key that you just spoke about was being regimented in your margin, to be able to give time for each, but also for yourself and for your wife.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why, I talk about it a lot, like on Sunday mornings and stuff, but like we take Sabbath very seriously, because obviously Monday through Friday I'm working. Sunday is not a rest day for me. And so Saturday is our Sabbath, and I can maybe get away with not having my Sabbath 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. But if I start stringing together some Saturdays where I've got a lot going on, I'm really busy, I'm hurting. Like it impacts.
See, now I feel really bad because, in full disclosure, this is Saturday. So I have called you in here.
Hey, like you said, this is just a good conversation. This is not work.
Into the G's podcast studio, and on your off day to make you talk about work.
Yeah, no, this is a good. All we're missing is a couple cigars. This is then we would be like Joe Rogan.
It would just been like it, yeah. Now, and you got up early this morning. You got up at 2:30. Is that what you told me?
I know Wendy was texting me from Germany. She goes, "We got in Germany." I was like, "Good, sounds great." Oh, I forgot. We're 6 hours ahead. Holy. But I'm glad they made it safe. I'm glad they're enjoying themselves in Germany.
The pictures look fun.
I haven't seen any pictures yet. Has Beth been sending you pictures?
Oh, yeah.
Of course she has.
Yeah.
She's the picture queen.
Yeah. Wendy was some young German dude. I don't know. He had her up on his shoulders. The couple of beer
yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, I can picture that. Wendy pounding beers.
October, delayed Oktoberfest. Back to ministry and small business ownership. I'll ask you 2 questions.
Okay.
1, how are they different?
Okay.
1, how are they the same? So we'll start with the first. How are they different? How is pastoring a church? Because in pastoring a church, it's, I hate to say it, but it almost feels like a small business.
Mm-hmm.
You wear a lot of hats. You help lead the flock, but you also lead the leadership team. I mean, you have to serve. Let's face it, it takes some admin skills to run a church. Bills still have to get paid. People you still got to make sure volunteers are where they need to be, all that kind of thing. So you do have to carry kind of a corporate hat just because church has to run, day to day. So how is that different? How is pastoring a church different from running and owning a small business?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind goes back to the people. So actually, I cut my teeth on, I guess, managing and building teams, not in business, but in ministry. So I was with the World Race from 2009 to 2012. And so
And what is the World Race?
So the World Race is a missions trip led by an organization called Adventures in Missions down in Gainesville, Georgia. And so I did the World Race in 2009, and it's an 11-month missions trip where each month you go to a different country and partner up with someone locally there, and you serve in a different country. And so it was amazing, one of the most transformative things I ever did. I did it in 2009, then I went and led one in 2010, and then I lived in Georgia on staff in 2011, and then came home in 2012. And so all that time I was building teams. That was kind of how I learned how to build teams, build connections with people, invest in people. Wouldn't change it for the world, but one of the things I learned as I then transitioned into small business ownership was that you can't manage employees the way you manage volunteers. And I think a lot of that goes back to the difference, again, separating out compensation from generosity. Because when I first started hiring employees, I was so naive. I was like, oh, we're just going to be great friends, and we're going to be with each other forever, and we're going to be so close, and we're all going to be Christians, and it's going to be great. And I've been burned enough by people that didn't want that. And honestly, now I've gotten to the point where I'm like, you know what? I pay you money. You do a job. If you're not doing a good enough job, you're gone. If I'm not paying you enough money, you're welcome to leave. But again, that's compensation. And of course, I'm kind, and of course, I'm fair, and I'm a good employer. But yeah, I just learned to be, again, the compensation is earned. It's more transactional. Like, this is a business arrangement as opposed to a church where, man, like, our church is awesome. And we do get to hang out with friends, and we are all on the same mission together. And we do get to do life together as friends, and we get to have great conversations. And it's a different dynamic because they're all volunteers, so they all want to be there. They've all bought in. And so it's just a different dynamic, and you invest in them in a different way than you would an employee.
Yeah, you can't. It's hard to fire a volunteer. And
you've done it before, though.
I have done it. I have definitely done it. It took me a long time, though, because you get in this mentality of never-ending grace with the church volunteer.
Right.
Like, they let you down, and you're just like, all right, I'll give them, you know what I mean? And you just keep giving them more. You have that mentality in the business world, and I imagine you're not going to be open too long.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you get employees that aren't showing up. We could have someone not show up for nursery, right? To keep nursery that week. And, I forgot, or I forgot to tell you. And that's okay. We'll plug in another volunteer. It might aggravate us, but we'll move on.
Right.
You get somebody that just does that at your work.
It ain't going to work. Yeah, you're not going to have clients. I mean, and again, that's the whole point. Compensation is earned. You need people who know, okay, if I don't work, I'm not going to get paid. And if I work harder and improve my skills as a worker, I'm going to get paid more. It's all tied to that. It's the same way you would, if you reverse it, if you gave someone a gift, you wouldn't want them to think that they had to earn that gift. And so compensation is earned, generosity is not. And it has to be that way.
Yeah.
And so, so I think that's the big thing. I think the other thing is just in business, everything, you spend money on things and make an investment and get money back, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's people, whatever. But in church, I feel like, and maybe, feel free to disagree with me. It's hard.
I never disagree with you, Tim.
In front of people. A lot of times you're spending money on the mission, but it's hard to quantify value in those things. Like for example, we just renovated our sanctuary. And maybe we didn't renovate the sanctuary, but we changed some things up. We flipped it. We built a stage. We did some aesthetically pleasing things with the sanctuary, and it was a pricey thing to do. But I think once it was done, everyone would agree that money was well spent, because it just really changed the feel of the sanctuary. But it's hard to quantify that. We did it because it reflected our mission of being hospitable and wanting to bring people in. But that's just a hard thing to quantify.
Right. I had a guy one time at a previous church. He asked me one time, he said, he was all big. He asked me several times, and finally I just said no. He wanted us to create a church directory. And what this guy wanted to do was, if someone in the church owned a plumbing company and he needed a plumber, he could look it up in the directory. Or if somebody needed an auto mechanic and somebody in the church did auto mechanics, they could find them in the directory. Which that sounds, in a utopian world, that would be great.
Right.
The problem was it only worked out about half the time. We never did the directory, but ultimately people find out what other people do. And sometimes church members can hire church members, and it works out fine and everything's great. But when it goes bad, it goes bad.
Yeah.
And usually one of the people end up getting mad and leaves the church, and they want the pastor to take sides and so on. Have you ever been faced with, and this is where the lines blur and your two lanes intersect a lot. Do I hire somebody from church in my business? Because I imagine that could also go really well or really bad. It could go well if y'all get along.
Right.
Because obviously they know you, they trust you, and you'll get into that and everything will be peachy keen. But I imagine it could also, just like church members hiring church members to do tasks at their house or whatever, remodeling or mechanic or whatever, it could also end very poorly. So
I know from experience that did not go well.
Oh.
And so so what ended up happening is I hired a guy and we got along really well, and he was a good employee. But for me, my problem was, as a boss, sometimes you have to have hard conversations, and so, but what I found myself with him is I didn't have the hard conversation because I didn't want that to bleed over into the church. I didn't want him to take it badly and to cause issues in the church. So it was almost like, double jeopardy, and so I didn't want that to happen. And so what ended up happening is I just didn't have those conversations. And so these issues went undealt with. And Jordan Peterson has a saying, he's like, slay the dragon in the cave before he makes his way to the village. And because I didn't have those hard conversations early on, I didn't slay the dragon in the cave. And those problems became so much worse. And eventually we did end our relationship, or our business relationship, but it was very messy and it was very ugly. And we were there was unresolved stuff there for a couple of years before we finally buried the hatchet.
And are they still at your church?
No. So, case in point. So, I learned my lesson. In fact, I even told you. The permission is still there. If I ever tell you that I think I'm going to hire someone from church, you have my permission to hang up the phone, drive the 5 minutes to my house, and slap me in the face. The offer still stands.
Well, I know that, and that's why I keep pushing church members. I just want to see if I can really do that. So that's how a business, your business and a church, pastoring a church is different. How are they the same?
I think so much of business and the church just comes down to connections. It just comes down to relationships. It's knowing people in the community. It's having connections with your clients, having connections with your church members, and it's building trust. And honestly, again with business, it's so easy to make everything transactional, and it's so business. It's so easy in business to make everything, what am I going to get for this? But honestly, just like in church, if in business, you just help people. If someone calls me who's not a client, because we, in the IT world, there's MSPs, which is what I am, and then there's the term is break fix, which is pretty much, if you just call someone when something's broken, that's called break fix. And so we don't do that.
What's the MSP?
Managed service provider. And managed service provider, they manage all your IT. They're more proactive. The idea, not all of them run this way, but the idea is that you prevent things from happening before they happen. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like to do break fix because I don't like having to deal with emergencies. But if someone calls me and they're down and they're not a client of mine, I could say, well, I need you to become a client, and then I can do this. Or I could just help them out. Maybe they never become a client, but I help them out. And so it was, and that's the best marketing. That's the best, sales is just being someone who's willing to help people out. And I think it's the same thing in church. So I think there are a lot of intersections, but most of those are relational. Most of those are relational, with just maintaining trust and connections.
Okay. I just had an epiphany.
Okay.
You're smarter than I am. You probably had already thought about this, but literally I've never thought about this till just now with your job and pastoring. Mm-hmm. So your company again is Solve. It does internet security. Mm-hmm. So your job is I got to convince this business that they're going to need to be protected. Mm-hmm. And because you don't want, as you say, the break fix to happen. You don't want the emergency stuff. Let me help cover you so that when these crises do arise, we've been proactive about it already, and it's easier to kind of overcome these things. Mm-hmm. Is that not exactly what you do as a pastor in church? You're selling the same thing, except from a spiritual point of view. You're saying, look, I could do emergency care. Mm-hmm. And you and I know we've both done pastoral emergency care. Somebody calls us, hey, I have a friend, they're going through this. Can you talk to them? We never say no. We meet with them and we see what we can do. 99% of the times, they never walk in our church again.
Right.
And we never hear from them again. They have their crisis. We fix it. We're not, I don't want to say we're God. We're not fixing, but we help bring some stability or peace or whatever, give them point them in the right direction. And then they're gone, But your job, my job as a pastor, is to sell people on Jesus. And this is what's best for you long term.
Right.
So when you have these crises, you're able to overcome them.
Right.
Because you've already been proactive with your faith. I have
never connected those two things before, but you're absolutely not at all. No, because so much of what we talk about in church, is because I feel like it's so easy for people to lean on Jesus when times are hard, but when things are good, they kind of do their own thing. And so I feel like the next level of commitment that we're trying to help people to get to is, man, like choose Jesus every day, even when life is good. Mm-hmm. And like you said, when you do that, when you live out the gospel, even when you don't necessarily need him, or you know what I mean, then when times do get hard, when things happen, you're already anchored. You're already rooted in your one true hope, your one source of strength, and you're not having to then scramble and all this stuff.
I mean, there's a whole sermon series there for you now. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, you got to have a firewall. You know, what do you want to call that firewall? Is that
the IT gospel?
Yes, and virus protection. I mean, you could unpack a lot there. You could do
backups.
Yes. Holy cow!
Oh man, yeah. I'm gonna have to write that stuff down. That's good. Yeah, but no, I have never connected those two things before. But you're absolutely right, because the whole point is just like if your business is running on business critical stuff, like you want the stuff to be monitored, you want the stuff to be backed up, you want other people on it, because if that goes down, your business goes down.
Monitoring is accountability.
You are killing it.
I am. This is what 28 and a half years does.
I know.
Everything's a sermon.
So I'll have like the bones of a good sermon series, and I'll give it to Mike, and Mike will think of the flashiest title. He'll think of all these things. Like Mike can take something that's bare bones and just make it flashy and make it attention-getting. It's great.
Well, I mean, when people think of Mike G, they think of flashiness, because that's very flamboyant.
You're a very flamboyant guy.
Flashy.
But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right. Those two are absolutely connected.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming in today.
Yeah, it was fun. I don't get to talk about both of these things side by side very often. So it's kind of fun to kind of talk through them. I appreciate that.
It took our wives leaving the country
to get us to hang out and do this.
I took the wives to the airport yesterday, and they were both just so great. They were just like, thank y'all for encouraging us to go. Thank you for letting us go. Not that we control our, what I'm saying? It's we've got this. Like, y'all just go and have a good time.
We're not really the husbands that's going to play the card. Like, no, you need to stay here.
Right.
We're not going to do that.
But it did make me think yesterday as I was driving away, oh, I'm going to bank this. Like, there's some trip Tim and I are now going to take.
Yes.
And we'll be like, we let you go to Germany.
Yeah, we got to figure that out now. We should do something fun.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, sorry, we're going to go backpack Alaska.
It's like, sorry, but we let you go to Germany Christmas market, so
yeah.
There you go.
How much money are they going to spend?
I don't even want to think about it.
I don't know. Well, the good thing is, obviously, they had to fly.
Yeah.
How are they going to get that stuff home? So they can't go overboard.
And it's not like Wendy took like a whole other like empty suitcase.
Yeah,
so
she didn't either.
She doesn't have a lot of like extra room. So I am thankful for that. I think that's some built-in buffer.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, unless they're going to ship a bunch of stuff back, I don't know what they're going to do.
Right.
But I'm okay with that.
It's funny. Yesterday, you told me that you finally started listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
So you've been cramming.
I've been studying up.
We're going to end this with a speed round. I'm going to throw these poll questions out to you that we've been discussing.
Okay.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Decorate for Christmas before or after Thanksgiving?
After Thanksgiving.
When you're packing, do you do it planning, or are you a last minute night before?
Last minute night before.
All right. There you go.
There you
go. Two out of three. There's one more. There's actually a fourth. I just remembered. Books. Is it the same? Is listening to a book same as reading a book?
I'm going to say no, because I have a hard time following it. I have a hard time following an audiobook. I actually have to see it.
All right.
So for me, like, I can't do audiobooks.
Just so we get along. 3 out of 4.
See, we're just there.
Do you hate cats, or you just don't want them? Like, you have dogs.
Okay, so this might be controversial. I think the whole dog cat argument is apples and oranges. Like, they're so different.
Yeah.
It's not like they're just like, I like them both, but I like them both for different reasons. But if I had to pick one, I'd pick a dog. Because I think a dog can be anything you need it to be. If you want it to be a companion and a comfort, it'll be a companion and a comfort. If you have a farm and you need it to be a worker and to herd your animals, it can be that.
Yeah.
If you're a police officer and you need to train it to protect you and to attack things, you can train it to do that too. Like, a dog is anything you need it to be. All a cat does is eat and drink and lick itself.
Yeah.
And give you like the evil eye sometimes. Yeah. That's all a cat does.
Yeah, I never thought about that before. A dog is like a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
You can, and cats are just like, look, this is what you get.
Oh yeah, no.
Like, this is as good as this.
Which, to be fair, like, that's kind of how you are.
That's exactly. That's why I wear sweatpants every day.
Like, you went to this other church, like, this is what you got. And they're like, we'll take it.
Yes, they're so desperate. They were so desperate. Do you think loving a dog has anything to do with only child? Because, Beth's an only child. She loves dogs.
I know. And Beth and I have had lots of conversations about our only child similarities. Maybe, because she and I definitely share the whole FOMO thing. We definitely enjoy like the affection for sure, because I got all of it growing up. Yeah, probably. I'm sure there's probably some. If you really dug deep, you probably could. Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Yeah.
That would be a good topic. I could have you back on the podcast sometime. You and Beth and I could discuss being an only child.
Only child dynamics. That would be a fun one to talk about.
Why that is good sometimes and why that's a challenge. That'd be.
Because you have a sister, so you could then kind of go in. I've never met her, but from what I hear, you have a sister.
Yeah, we're 6 years apart and live 2 hours away, and I love my sister. I have no problems with her. We just never communicate.
So do you love her more because you never communicate?
Probably. I don't know. I think if she lived close, I think we'd get along fine. We have a lot of the same interests. I mean, our kids love each other. They love hanging out. I mean, I think we'd be great, but we just lead these very busy lives, and it sounds bad to say, people are like, hey, Mike, tell us about your sister. And I have to pause. I'm like, I have a sister?
Yeah. But I think it's the same way. I have cousins that we're all in similar ages, and most of them live right around here. We may see each other 3 times a year. Yeah. And it's the same thing. Like when we get together, we have a blast, but then we all get caught up in our lives. And
don't even get me started on cousins. I ain't lying. This is the other day. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Josh, and I said something about my mom, and I was like, Mama's sister. And he said, Mama has a sister? And I was like, my aunt. And he was like, I've never met her. Josh is 15. I'm like, yes, you have. Like, she lives like 10 minutes from us, literally. And he's like, I don't know. I was like, and my cousins. He was like, you've got cousins? Like, my 15-year-old, honest to goodness, had no idea I have aunts, uncles, or cousins, because I am so detached from my family.
Yeah, see, and maybe it's the only child in me. Like I've become like the one in the family that tries to bring everyone together, and it's like trying to hold water in your hand. It's just so hard. But yeah, I do. I'm trying to get I'm that. I've kind of filled in that role now. I try to get all my cousins and get the family together whenever we can.
Good for you.
But I would love to actually pick Beth's brain as an only child, because Wendy and I don't have kids. But you guys have 3 kids. So how is it as an only child raising 3 kids, 3 siblings? I would love to kind of hear. Yeah. All the ways that has been hard for her.
She doesn't understand fighting. That's the biggest thing. Yeah. She's like, why are they yelling at each other? Why are they fighting? And and our kids get along great. Yeah. But I'm like, this is what brothers and sisters do.
Yeah.
Like this is normal. This is not correct. But because Beth never grew up with a sibling, she never got to experience that dynamic of, it's mine, no, it's mine, or tattling or things like that. And so that was the biggest shock for her when our kids started getting to that point where they could fight or they could tattle on one another, or whatever. Beth thought they were broken. Yeah. And I'm like, no, they're normal. That's.
I will say, I think what helped me is I lived just down the road from a development, and I had a lot of really close friends there. And so even though I didn't have any siblings, I got to experience that dynamic with them. Yeah. We always hung out, and so we would get into fights. And my buddy, his parents got new refrigerators, so we shoved them in the box and put them down the stairs, and boy stuff.
Oh yeah, boy stuff. Boys will be boys.
Boys will be boys, exactly. So I feel like I at least had to experience that dynamic.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, hey, Tim, thanks a lot for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun.
It was a blast. We'll do it again.
So, as I said, this is a pop-up podcast, so you'll be hearing it sometime during the week. And then next Saturday, hopefully we'll be going with episode, I don't know if I would call this one 6 or the next one 6. This is a pop-up. I'll figure that out.
Is it episode 5B?
5B, yes, there it is. This is episode 5B. That's a good one, Tim. So episode 6 or whatever we're on, Beth will be back, and we get to hear all about her trip to Germany.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's all right.
Should we have Beth and Wendy on?
Oh, my gosh.
Would that be too much?
We don't.
We don't need that.
I've been wanting to keep these. My original plan was 30 to 40. They've been running about 40 to 50.
I've noticed that.
And,
They're a
and
little
so
long.
you get Beth and Wendy on here, it's going to run for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah, okay.
So
I hear you. That's
we'll
good.
see. But thanks a lot for being here and for hanging out with me today, man.
My pleasure. It's fun.
All right. So this is Mike and Tim. This is the Hey, Are You Still There podcast, and we'll be back next week at our regular time.